Hi there. So in this video, we're going to do the second lecture about GDP. And so if you remember in the first video, I talked about how GDP has some limitations and that we use it as kind of a stand-in for standard of living. Get it? But at the same time, there's certain things that we have to do to it to make it a little bit more meaningful for us and to allow us to use it to compare different countries and their economic performance. So if the whole goal here is measuring economic performance, we need something that we can actually use to kind of measure against. And so that's what this whole lecture is about, is like thinking about how can we improve GDP and the way that we use this statistic. So the first thing to know about GDP is that the quality of life is not included in it, right? And there's a very famous video about Robert Kennedy, who was the brother of Jack Kennedy, who was running for president in 1968. And he delivered this speech about the limitations of using what was then, it's something called GNP, which is quite similar. It's that it's limiting. And so this is a quick little speech. I'm going to play it for you, and hopefully you kind of get some of the idea here.
Our gross national product now is over $800 billion a year. But that gross national product, if we judge the United States of America by that gross national product counts air pollution and cigarette advertising and ambulances to clear our highways of carnage. It counts special locks for our doors and the jails for the people who break them. It counts the destruction of the redwoods and the loss of our natural wonder in chaotic sprawl. It counts napalm, and it counts nuclear warheads and armored cars for the police to fight the riots in our cities. It counts Whitman's rifle and Speck's knife, and the television programs which glorify violence in order to sell toys to our children. Yet the gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry, or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. And it can tell us everything about America, except why we are proud that we are Americans.
So let's see here. So I hope that that kind of gives you a window into thinking about worth, right? We talked before about how we often say these phrases like net worth, and that, you know, Jeff Bezos is worth $180 billion. And we're ascribing kind of an individual's worth to that. What we can't do when we talk about GDP is just say, well, it's bigger this year, so therefore everybody's better off, right? And as Robert Kennedy kind of points out there. There's a list of things here that I've included in terms of thinking about quality of life. It doesn't measure things like leisure, volunteerism, natural beauty, happiness, but it does measure when we have to respond to natural disasters. It measures the spending that we have to do on climate change and the spending that we have to do when we lock people up, right? And so there's lots of things that get included here that don't necessarily add to someone's standard of living. And I think that that's a useful thing before we go any further with this, to recognize it. The second thing that it doesn't include is population, and we can adjust this, right? We can fix GDP for this by using something called GDP per capita. And per capita means literally per head. And so you count all the heads in the society and you take the nominal GDP and you divide by that. And so you can see here, this is the list of the top kind of countries by nominal GDP. And you can see that the United States, and this is in trillions. So the United States makes $19 trillion worth of goods and services in a year. But then when you divide it by the number of people in America, we're number 7, right? And so there's $59,500. So this is just in the regular units. And then the first column is in trillions. And you can actually, or sorry, it's in billions, I should be clear. It's in 19,000 billions, so $19 trillion, because down here you have DR Congo at just $37 billion. And when you divide DR Congo by the large population that's there, they have some of the lowest GDP per capita in the world. at about $500 per person. Now, again, that shouldn't be shocking, because when you think about it, GDP doesn't include non-market activities. So if you're growing a lot of food at home, if you're bartering for many of your goods, you're saying, here's some plantains, can you get me a new shirt? That sort of thing doesn't count in your GDP, and that's a lot of the economic activity that happens in DR Congo and other countries as well. If it's home produced, if it's used goods and things like that, they don't count. So we adjust for population by doing per capita. Then the third thing that we're going to have to think about is price levels over time. And so there's a few ways that we adjust these. So I've actually listed two different things here. One is adjust for purchasing power by using something called purchasing power parity. If you've ever been to other countries or other cities around the United States even, you'll notice that sometimes things are more expensive or less expensive in other areas. And so what we do with GDP is we make an adjustment based on how much could that like money purchase, right? A haircut in St. Louis is going to be relatively cheaper than a haircut in New York City, but it's still a haircut. And so what we do is we try to like balance those using something called purchasing power parity. And so if you look actually down here at the bottom, I go ahead and I add the purchasing power parity, and you can see that the United States is the same. That's because what they do, the economists who scale it are from the United States, and so they scale it all to the US. They'd say, well, if you get a haircut in the United Kingdom, if you get a haircut in China, if you get a haircut in DR Congo, it's all worth the same amount. So they kind of count the number of haircuts and then price them the same. And so you can see that the United States actually drops when we make that adjustment, because it's somewhat more expensive to live in the United States and somewhat cheaper elsewhere. You can see that China has this very large nominal GDP, but when you account for all the people that live there, they drop to about the middle of the pack, and they stay in the middle of the pack even when you adjust it for purchasing power. But you can see that other countries kind of have, there's not a huge shift, but you can see some other countries might shift a little bit when we make adjustments in terms of purchasing power. And so there's some changes, although they generally, the rank order stays about the same. The second thing we do is we adjust for changes in price level. So over time, we know that prices change, right? That there's this thing called inflation. And so if we want to measure performance over time, we actually have to keep the prices the same over time. And so this is the second thing that we're going to be looking at in thinking about how to adjust GDP. So one way we adjust it is for price levels currently, and then the second is like price levels over time. And this method is we use two different things, two different measures of GDP. We call nominal GDP, which just means GDP in name only, nominal meaning name or nomen. And so this is the GDP calculated in the current year prices. It's not terribly useful. It's not useful at all for comparing over time because it uses the current year's prices. So just to be clear, 2015's nominal GDP would be 2015's price, $4, times the number of widgets. So 5 widgets times 4, plus $5 per grebe times 2 grebes. So 2 times 5, and that gives us 30. And then we do the nominal GDP, and we can find that it's 10 times 4 plus 4 times 10 is 80. And so if we were just using nominal GDP, we would say that the GDP more than doubled, right? It went from 30 to 80, it almost tripled, in fact. But what we can actually look at if we ignore the prices for a second is that it didn't just more than double. Right here it went from 30 to 80, but realistically we just doubled the amount of output. We went from 5 to 10 widgets and 2 to 4 grebes. And so this 30, if we were being accurate, it didn't really double between 2015 and 2019. It didn't really more than double, it just doubled, should be clear here. Real GDP is kind of adjusting for that. And so the way we do real GDP is again, the reason is we're trying to compare over time, is we just pick a year's prices and we stick with them. That's called making a base year. So if we make the base year be 2015, that means use 2015 prices. That's what that means. And so go ahead and write that there in your notes. Use 2015 prices. When we say that something is a base year, that's what we're saying. And so the real GDP in 2015, if using 2015 prices, well, it's the same as the nominal because it's 4 times 5 plus 2 times 5. So it's same as GDPN, so it's equal to 30. Now we could do like real GDP in 2015 using 2019's prices. That would be using 2019 as the base year, but this problem says use 2015. So now let's do real GDP in 2019 using 2015 prices. So in other words, we're going to do this 10 and this 4. The output using the 2015's prices, this 4 and this 5. So we'll do 10 times 4, and again, this is this 10 times this $4 up here, these 4 grebes times these 5, plus 4 times 5 is equal to 60. And so there we can see that actually the output doubled. And again, we're just using the real GDP to do that. Now, another method that we use to do this is we use an index value that will just automatically adjust the nominal to the real, or allow us to kind of make comparisons over time. And this is called the GDP deflator. As you can imagine, we said we went from 30 to 80 when in fact we should have said 30 to 60. So what we need is something that will just kind of deflate the 80 like a balloon and shrink it down to the proper size of 60. And so this is the idea. We'd say if the GDP deflator is 150 and our base year is 100, then that means that this year we have 50% higher prices than we did in the base year. That it's really just a way that we can kind of quickly say, okay, the price levels have changed this much, and it allows us to quickly swap between nominal and real. So the GDP deflator, and I'm just writing the formula here, is 100 times the nominal GDP over the real GDP. And by the way, it's fine if you want to write GDPR or GDPN as well. Now, if the base year is 2015, then the deflator in 2019. So this is the relatively straightforward thing. The deflator is 100 times the nominal over the real. And so we know that the nominal and the real are here, the nominal is here, the real is here. And so we just say the nominal is 80 and the base is 60. And so again, we're just taking the numbers that we've already calculated, and we say here, 8 over 6 is 1.33, so that's 133. And that tells us that prices have gone up 33%. So therefore, inflation increased 33%. Or actually, it's better to say probably price levels increased 33%. And that tells us since the base year. Okay, then the last thing for today is to understand just kind of why, when we showed you that rank order listing, why would that be different in different countries? Why would one country have a very low GDP per capita and another would have a very high one? In short, it's about productivity. It's about how productive you are with the resources that you have. So you can start by saying, well, you have to have the resources. But in today's modern world, you don't really have to have the resources right there in front of you. But what you have to do is be really productive with it. And productivity is affected by a whole host of factors. The economic system can affect your productivity. So whether you have a market system or a command economy, and the degree to which you're a market system or a command economy. Property rights is another one where there's really clear property rights and you have an effective judicial system that doesn't favor special interests and things like that. Availability of capital, which is like human capital, are your workers trained really well? And physical capital, which is the amount of machines you have and what you do with them. One famous statement about the DR Congo, for just a moment, is that when the Belgians left, because they had imperialized DR Congo, when they left in the 1960s, they took everything with them. They left a country of tens of millions of people with only a handful of college graduates. They had done virtually nothing in terms of building up the Belgian Congo's education system. So they had a handful of college graduates. They literally went through and took every desk in every government office. They moved all the desks. They took every stapler even out of and it's kind of nuts. But they left them with an absence of physical and human capital, which persists even today in terms of what we see in the economics of it. And then finally, the availability of land. I think this quote from Arthur Young, an English agriculturalist, kind of an early economist, he said, "Give a man the secure possession of a bleak rock and he will turn it into a garden. Give him 9 years lease and he will turn it into a desert. The magic of property turns sand into gold." And that's the idea of property rights. When you know you can count on benefiting from improving something, you'll improve it. And so hopefully you can kind of get some of the idea of the good, bad, and the ugly of GDP from this lecture. I'll see you next time.